Hi, my name is Vanessa, and I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date's October 8th, 2017. And today I'm going to be talking about my sponsee, Faith, who passed away from a fentanyl overdose after 5 years of sobriety. So, a little bit about how I met Faith. She had come to me, I guess, through a referral from somebody in the program. She had a few years sober already. She was actually ahead of me in time by like a few months. What's by like 6, 7 months. And she just needed to grow. She wasn't doing any kind of work. She was kind of struggling, but she had been sober. And, we had a lot in common as far as our addiction stories, where it took us, and also the mental health, the depression, and the anxiety that go along with it, along with a lot of codependency issues that we struggled with, and, overall people pleasing, just run of the mill addict, alcoholic stuff. We had very different drugs of choice. Mine, of course, is primarily alcohol, and she had heroin as her primary. And so none of it, I mean, it matters. It can matter. When you're relating to somebody, you want them to know that you understand where something can take you. But I can also take you and tell you that my alcoholism took me to almost the exact same spots. So it really doesn't, it's not a huge differentiator for me. And this is why in the Big Book Awakening program, we really emphasize that this is a spiritual condition that, in a medical condition that we have to address. And we're looking for similarities and not necessarily all the things that separate us or make us different from each other. And so, by the way, let me know if you like this setup. I'm trying something new here, and I don't know if it's okay. I don't know. I don't know anything these days. So, that said, we had met, and she had just lived right down the street from me, so it was like perfect. And she would come over to my apartment. We would go through the step work. Again, I go through the step work with the Big Book Awakening process, and it's a long process. It requires commitment, and my recovery relies on helping other people. So I need to make sure that the women I'm working with are going to show up. Because what if I'm having a really bad day too, and I'm counting on working with another alcoholic or addict, and they're like, no, I'm good. Not really into it this week. That kind of puts me at risk too. And I make sure to emphasize that so that they also understand that when they're vetting sponsees. I take it very seriously that this is like, I make a lot of jokes about addiction and alcoholism. Do not get me wrong. But at the end of the day, I also understand that people do die from this disease. And this whole idea that relapse is part of recovery, I understood it because I was a chronic relapser. I could not get sober. I could not stay sober. And so I understand, and it made me feel okay, but that people would say that. But the reality is that it doesn't need to be part of somebody's recovery story, and ideally that it not be, because you don't know how many. I heard it said once, like, we don't know, somebody would say, like, you don't know how many relapses you got left in you. I don't know how many recoveries I've got left in me. Um, and more to the point, like, because drugs like fentanyl exist and who knows what else will come out in the future, like that one relapse can absolutely just take you out, and then you don't got chances for more recovery. So, anyhow, so we'd started meeting, we went through the work, and she was committed. She was showing up, she was doing the work. She also had therapy she was going to, and all of this is very out in public. I would not be speaking about this if her mother wasn't also such an advocate just for the program and for what it did for her. And she openly discusses and speaks about this. Also, she worked at a recovery center, so it's not, I'm not going to say her last name, but I'm going to give you some resources so that you can look up the case a little bit afterwards. Because I do think it's important that we share this information and that we talk about it more openly. So you're going to see her name and stuff, but I'm not going to say it. Okay, so we would go through the step work. Again, this is a very deep process of really understanding what is causing this, not even what's causing it, but what can we do to feel comfortable in the discomfort of existing in this world. I'm getting more and more in tune and aligned with that freaking quote, and I used to quote it all the time, but now it's kind of turned into a cliche, but it's still accurate, that I really do believe that we are spiritual beings living a human existence. And I like, to me, it just resonates as to why it's so difficult to make sense of the nonsense in this world. Because there's so many things I feel internally, intrinsically, like on a molecular level, that I don't understand why it has to be this way on Earth. And I'm not doing that to opt out of the human experience, though I have absolutely dreamed and fantasized about doing so. It's more just this idea of like, okay, how can I bring more of like the holiness that I know is just in us all innately, even the people who I don't like. I know that they have it too. And how can I bring that back out in us so that we can exist on that level and less this level of like, you know, capitalism and money and greed and manipulation and delusion. And, it's not all that. It's just a lot of that leads us there. And like this innate sense of like unworthiness that we all get for no reason. Who's putting the worth on us? It's so infuriating when people think that they're not worthy of stuff. And this is for myself too, because it's not like I absolutely 110% still struggle with this. It's not like I have it got all figured out either, but I never want to get it all figured out. I think that once we think that we have it all figured out, that means that we are in a really dangerous place to kind of plummet. And I've been several times in my recovery plateaued as far as my growth. And like somebody who I really looked up to in recovery, who's died already from cancer, was Mark Houston. And he would always say, if you're not growing, you're going. And it's totally true. I want to continue to always be growing. And so Faith really shared a lot of that same, she understood the need to continue to grow, not just spiritually, but also just in relationship and also just in community. And just like as the fundamental like adulting ways that and I hate that term, but it's like we really, you stop maturing like mentally and like interpersonally when you begin to get involved with drugs and alcohol to like the addict level. And so it's like sometimes I meet people who are like 30 years old who are way more mature than I am now. And just have like their shit together a lot more than I do. And it's like, huh? Like, how did you learn that? Not only to mention that a lot of that has to do with like, you know, our conditioning and how we grew up and everything, but and the opportunities that we're given, but still. Um, so what ended up happening is, I worked with Faith up to, and it was a struggle to actually get her through the fourth step. But we worked together for a year from 2021 to 2022. And she celebrated her 5 years in 2022. And we went through the fourth step. Now, I'm going to admit she did struggle a little bit on this step, and it is a difficult process, but it's actually really simple. It's an incredibly simple process to go through the fourth step. It just requires, like, I just remember having to take naps between every 3 or 4 resentments that I was writing out because it was so draining, even though, I could have like 10 cups of coffee and just like sit in there, like really determined to get this hammered out. But the reality is that like when we're facing some of these really more emotional, deep-seated beliefs and learning to feel and experience them differently, it's going to exhaust you. It's going to exhaust you emotionally, physically, it's exhausting, and spiritually, it's exhausting. And I mean, you are kind of like reorienting your entire perspective on experiences that have shaped your decisions up until that point. And so, she struggled a little bit there. There was quite a bit of delay. And at one point, I was like, you're not showing up anymore. So I don't know if we're still doing this thing. Just know that I'm still here for you. If you want to continue working together, I'm happy to do that. But I'm going to stop reaching out. I'm going to stop putting in more effort because I, at that point, cared more about her recovery, it felt like, than she did. And that's where I draw the line, because that to me is signaling codependency. And that's me thing at that point, right? So I drew that line and she was like, I understand. And she had some other stuff going on. And so but we did eventually get through it. So she reached out to me and then we do the fifth step. And the fifth step is a very intimate process where you are reading all of your resentments and all your realizations and your new conclusions about it. And you're admitting where you caused harm. Very difficult step, very difficult step. And she did it. And we spent about 11 hours in my living room with Coppola and Gladwell right next to us. And, you know, we went through that. It was a beautiful process. I love that step. It's one of my favorites. And yeah, it was a beautiful process. We had one break and we went and got in and out separately. By the way, we're just like, because when you're talking to somebody for that long, it's like, let me just refresh for a second. We came back, she was in a great mood, and we got that knocked out. And then after that, we did steps 6 and 7, and that's more a meditative step where the person, really reflects on what they have seen, what they have understood from steps that they just took, all the work that they've had until that point, had completed until that point. And they really ask God, who they established in steps 3, to remove this stuff, just remove these beliefs that I've had that are no longer serving me. I understand that I don't need them anymore because I have a new purpose. I have new footing. My roots are now in richer soil, and not based on, resentments or beliefs around my unworthiness because somebody didn't reciprocate, care for me because I didn't articulate my needs well enough or whatever, and like that's a really dumbed down, simple way of something you might see in a resentment inventory, but it's kind of along those lines, right? And what happens is that sometimes we become so attached to these storylines that we've told ourselves because we hold on to them as justification for how much time we've spent just acting out in certain ways. If somebody gets close, I'm going to push them away. If somebody lies to me, I'm going to cut them off. If somebody is mean to me, I'm going to be meaner. These whole behaviors that all stem from fear, but that really, a fear is just a seed for like a really poisonous plant. And that just tends to really just come grow out of control, right? And so when we're able to pull these fears out from the root, we're stopping it dead in its tracks, and we're able to be a little bit more conscientious moving forward and really live and orient ourselves again on a different level. And so it was a beautiful process. I told her, go do 6 and 7. She took a couple days to do it. She ended up, she went to the beach and she did it, and she called me and said that she was done, which were the instructions. I was like, lovely. Okay, make your list of resentments. I'm sorry, your list of people who we're going to make amends to. And we usually get this list based off of the people from the resentment inventory. And she was like, great. Now, one of the resentments that she had read to me was regarding a, a guy named Derek. And so she had told me that this was somebody she had relapsed with. She had been trying to get sober for, I'm gonna round up to like around like 9 or 10 years. And actually maybe a little bit, so maybe more like closer to 7 or 8 years. And in that time, she had relapsed a few times. And when she had relapsed with this one person who she had met in a rehab years ago. And it was always with this person, Derek, who she had relapsed with. And the impression that I got off of the resentments that she had read me was that this was somebody who was struggling a lot with addiction and didn't want to be alone. And Faith was, I just cannot overemphasize how caring she was. She was so caring. She cared so deeply about other people. And again, I like to think that that's also one of my basis for existing on this planet, is for caring for other people. And so she never cut him off. People told her all the time, cut him off, he's not good for you, cut him off. And from what I can glean, and it's really none of my business, it wasn't a romantic thing. It wasn't anything like that. It was just, when you've known people for so long, we can create these stories around the attachments that we have to them, right? And this was somebody who had been with her since the beginning when she was trying to get sober. And so, um, yeah, yeah. So she told me about him and she asked if she should put him on her amends list. Now, there's some rules around this, right? Like, we don't want to reach out to people who if we are going to cause more harm to themselves or to us or to other people involved with that relationship. And so, I remember asking, is he still sober? And that's not always a huge indicator to me whether or not we should make amends or whether it's going to cause more harm. Sometimes we participate in other people's um, enabling, right? Sometimes we enable other people, and sometimes we enable other people just by staying in their lives when they're not making an effort to change. And so I had asked if he was still using, and I'm pretty sure that she told me that she wasn't sure or that he might have been. I'm not sure. Either way, I didn't really get the impression that I was like, you have to go make amends to him, blah blah blah. I really sometimes I really question that, but just knowing what I knew and the feeling that I'm getting instinctually, and if I did, I don't know, but I really don't think that I would have told her to make amends or something like that. What I definitely would have told her was to take it to God, take it to prayer and meditation, because she was going to get more information that way than she ever would from me. Um, and so that was that. And we finished that up, I guess, towards the end of March or mid-March. And then on the Saturday before Mother's Day, I had sent her, she had like a little wiener dog. His name was Toby, with her girlfriend. And there was this cute little meetup for those dogs at the park. And by the way, if it looks like I have a black eye, it's because I rubbed the crap out of my eye earlier. I don't know why I always do that. It's just, I forget that I'm wearing makeup and then I look later and it looks like I got punched in the eye. So anyway, and I sent it to her on Instagram and she usually would get right back to me. I try not to totally smother my sponsees all the time, but I had sent that to her and I didn't get a response from her, but the next day was Mother's Day. And so I was like, she's probably just busy with her mom. That I didn't hear from her. And then maybe like, I want to say it was like probably on a Tuesday or something. I got a text and a call from her girlfriend and who told me that Faithe had relapsed and overdosed on Mother's Day. And so they had found her on Monday or that Sunday night. And I was so confused. I mean, you can just imagine the confusion, right? You're working with somebody, you're meeting with them every week for 2 hours a week. They're communicating with you every single day. Um, and I guess something she had relationship issues, adding to some dental work, which had her on painkillers, and adding to just overall frustration navigating the healthcare system for a therapist. And so that was all happening. It was just a perfect storm, unfortunately. And what had happened was that she had reached out to this Derek guy and asked first if he was sober, and he was not. And then she asked if he had any drugs. And so specifically any painkillers, the painkillers that she had been prescribed by the dentist. She'd asked for some more of those, and he ended up orchestrating a drug deal. And I say that because that's what the court records state. His defense was that he would never do that, that he just gave her some from his supply and was not benefiting from it monetarily, but he asked her to go to an ATM, and they exchanged pills and money. Those pills ended up having fentanyl in them. And so when Faithe went home and took them, she died. Um, and so the court case ended up started in 2023. And Faith's mom, who I've remained close to throughout this whole time, asked me if I would be willing to read my victim impact statement about how this has affected me. Now, bear in mind that I had a real doozy of a year, because in December 2021, nope, sorry, December 20, yeah, December 2021, I had lost another sponsee. I had only worked with her for about 4 months, and she had some health issues, and she was really struggling. Her name was Anna, and she was really struggling with physical pain and plus being an alcoholic. And she was young, but she had just passed away in December of 2021. And then I remember telling Faith about her, and I remember her saying, "I'm not going to die on you." I'm not even kidding. That conversation happened. Um, and then, so then just months later, Faith died. So in 2022, uh, in May, I guess, April of 2022. Nope, May of 2022. And then in December of 2022, my other sponsee, I'd known since like year two of my sobriety, her name was Andrea. She ended up dying from alcohol. She had just drank herself to death, and she was, not even 40 years old. So all these women were young women. Um, she was 36, 37 when she died. Andrea was, and she left behind an 11-year-old daughter. And I had just seen her uh, the month before as well, but she and I hadn't been working together anymore, because she was struggling to find time for it. She was a single mom working 2.5 jobs. She was a very hard worker. But anyhow, so it was a rough going, you know what I mean? And so I was like, and at minimum sought reimbursement, right? And so, um, yeah. Um, so after that, and I went to court and there was a lot in between, right? Like Faith Memorial Service was a doozy, and that was in 2022. And I just remember going, I didn't really know any of her friends. Just the one person who had introduced me to her. She went to some of the same meetings that I went to, but when you sponsor somebody, you know them in a very narrow and specific way. And you know them through one of the worst ways that they have, which is through their addiction. And so it's like, everybody else that was there was, you know, a coworker or a friend, or they grew up with her, or they had been helped by her, or they went to school with her, or they used and got sober with her, which, is aligned. But it was, I had spent a year working with her, talking through this very specific thing that had ended up killing her. And so I just, to say that I know that it's not my fault. I know that. I know that intellectually. I know that. Um, like I feel it in my body that it's not my fault, right? I understand this to be true. but there is still this little tiny seed of doubt of like, if I could have done something just a little bit better to make it click a little bit more, so that it was a little bit more powerful, so it was a little bit more clear to her that this didn't need to be the way it had to be, right? Um, but again, I know that whatever was going to happen, and I trust that whatever was going to happen was going to happen. It was a series of things that led us to this point. I can't question it any further. Like it is what it is. Also, I found it so incredibly, I mean, it was just so helpful to hear it from her own mother that, and from her friends, that she really valued the work that we did together. Um, and that she even told anybody about the work we did together. I think it was just mostly just so like, oh, babe, I guess you did like me, you know? And so that, because I'm never really caring about being liked when I'm working with the sponsee, and I tell them that too. It's that, you know, I love people way too much to be dishonest. And if I need to tell somebody a truth that I think is going to save them, I will tell them that truth because I value that truth over their feelings. Um, and I value their life over their feelings. And that's also something that I established from the get-go with my sponsees, because although I really do try to say the truth in the most tactful way, it is not a strong point for me, especially when I'm really concerned. So, and that's not an excuse. I'm still working on it. Um, and luckily, Faith was always just very open-minded to accepting new ways of thinking and seeing things. She just really was so willing to do things differently this time, you know, and to keep her sobriety, um, and her recovery, right? And so, you know, I went to court. I, of course, agreed to, oh, but I was saying about Faith's memorial. You know, it was so interesting to be there because and I hadn't even met Faith's mom at that point. I didn't even talk to her that day. We had just kind of chatted through social media and text and phone call. But you know, Faith's mom was talking about how she had gone through her room to clean out all her stuff and everything and pack everything up. And she had found, you know, I can't remember, or I just imagined it that she brought her big book, you know, which I don't have one around me, right? I have one over there. Um, and the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we actually ended up transcribing it. So when we're transcribing this, it means that we're making notes into the book so that we're understanding it a little bit better. Of course, English doesn't age very well. So the book was written in the 30s. We make notes in it based on like updated vocabulary so that we can actually have an experience with the book. We're not just reading this book written by a bunch of educated, rich white dudes from the 1930s, right? And so she was talking about this book that she had pulled out from her daughter's room and how she had all these notes written into it, and she really understood Faith's commitment to this program. And she did, you know, she was into it. Um, and um, so that happened, and that made me cry, and I ended up leaving the service because I mean that book had just been in my living room 3 weeks earlier, you know, and we had just been reading from it. So having that experience again was very, it was probably one of the first times where I'd kind of dissociated and felt like this was gonna be a difficult year ahead, a difficult lifetime ahead. And so I ended up leaving that and trying to dissociate as much as possible, and ended up getting really heavily involved in the local San Diego comedy community. Don't ask. And so then I was asked to do the victim impact statement, et cetera. And so court came about. He was giving a lot of resistance to signing the plea deal because he maintained that he was still innocent and so forth. And then we, you know, there's just a lot of back and forth around that. And then he finally did sign it. And then the sentencing was going to come up. And so, and then it got pushed back, then it got rescheduled, then all this stuff. And so I had started writing my victim impact statements in October, maybe October of 2023. And then Faith's mom asked for me to give it to her by I guess the end of November or the beginning of December. And so I'm not proud of this, but I'm going to be honest because honesty is, well, my life's reliant upon it. um, and so I used ChatGPT to try to write in some of the details I couldn't comprehend. I couldn't put into words. And I love writing, and I've been waiting to if you check any of my blogs, I still haven't fully written about this experience. This is probably the most I've ever talked, and this is still very superficial level, and I don't know that anyone will ever know everything that happened or that went on. This is literally just the most I've talked about it ever. But it was really difficult. So I was like, I'm just going to plug this into Chat GPT and maybe it'll spit out something good enough. And so I sent that draft to Faith's mom. She made some edits to it, and I was like, that's fine. And I knew I was just going to rewrite it anyway for when it came down to reading it in court. And that was just to like send it to the attorneys and the prosecutor and prosecution and whatever and probation. And so this Monday, it was February 5th, we finally were going to read the victim impact statements at the sentencing. So at the sentencing, the maximum time for what he was being charged with was 20 years. This is a 29-year-old man who had spent the majority of his 20s in and out of jail, in and out of rehab. He had just very recently also been serving time and been sentenced to rehab for a DUI that he had. I think it was his third one, or maybe it was his first one, where he had gotten into an accident under the influence of fentanyl, because he is a fentanyl addict. This was his primary drug of choice, non-choice. And he hit somebody and she almost lost a limb. Her entire life is now tragically and drastically changed because of an accident caused by Derek in his fentanyl use addiction. And so, that was also weighing pretty heavily. Hey, I got 3 DUIs. I've hit somebody head on uh, under the influence. They had a completely demolished car. I luckily had insurance and nobody was seriously injured, but that's just through luck. It's not because of anything else. And that was after 5 years of daily driving under the influence of alcohol, So who am I to judge this guy, right? It felt very bad. I didn't really know. I didn't really know what to feel about him. He was a young kid, it looked like to me. Like, he's 29 years old. I guess he had lost his mother very early. He'd been abused in a facility that was supposed to help him. He had a lot of instability throughout his life. And so do a lot of people. And so do a lot of people, and they don't go on to become addicts and hurt other people drastically and eventually end up in a transaction that kills somebody, you know? So it was very difficult to see him. And he was just there, and he gave his statement. It was very apologetic. And I do feel that he and Faith really cared for each other. I don't think that he's a bad person. But up until that point, I hadn't really ever seen him, talked to him, heard his voice, understood anything about him. Also, his father is dying from a I forget what maybe it's ALS. Um, and he was in a wheelchair and he couldn't talk anymore. And so another reason why they were asking for a shorter sentence in jail is because he wouldn't be able to communicate with his dad, because his dad's voice doesn't work anymore, and it's difficult for him to get into any communication could only be through phone. And it was likely that his father was going to die within the next 5 years, and he didn't want to miss his final time with his dad, who had been really the only constant in his life. So max sentence was 20 years. Probation recommended 14 to 17 years. Faith's mom wanted the 14 to 17 years. Um, and so I'm going to just read you the victim impact statement that I wrote, because the day of, literally the morning of the court date, Faith's ex-fiance Rigel had reached out to me and was like, "It's gonna be a day, huh?" And I was like, "Ain't it though?" And so I was telling him about my victim impact statement, and he's like, "I'm just gonna wing it. I'm just gonna go up there and give him what I got." And I was like, "Oh Lordy," you know. I had just spent the night before rewriting mine. And I think I just didn't really know what the purpose of it was. I think I just really lacked clarity around what I wanted to say. And because what is the point of saying anything anymore? Um, he's going to jail. He's likely not going to spend his final years with his dad, the final years of his dad's life with him. Faith is dead again. I just didn't understand. But I hadn't ever also explained my experience with it to anybody. Also because talking about death in general is not um, a super popular topic, believe it or not. So, and I can talk about it all day. It just is my personality at this point. So I do want to read that to you. And so in the courtroom, they went over his criminal history. They went over the recommended sentencing. I was going to speak, and then Rigel, and then Faith's mom, Judith, and then then Faith's dad, Charlie, and then Faith's mom, Judith. And, um, you know, half of the courtroom was there for Faith. All the seats were taken. We all had sunflowers because that was one of her favorite flowers. That was her favorite flower. And then the other side was all of Derek's family and friends. And they were all, I mean, that side was also packed. And so, and his dad was there in his wheelchair. And when I rewrote, actually, anytime that I've written this victim impact statement, I am just imagining myself reading it to the judge. I'm forgetting that all of these other people are also going to be there. So that hit me literally like 1 minute before I was asked to go up and speak. Because then what I had written was like, oh, this is okay. I will read that to you now. I mean, and the first one to go up, and Faith's mom hands me these beautiful pictures of Faith. And I have nothing, and she's like asking me to put them up, and I'm like, what? Like, I'm so like checked out. And only thing that I have the only thing that I'm asking for myself to do is just stay present in this moment, because I have spent the last year just completely, and I always say this word, I don't think people really understand what it means when I'm dissociated. Like it's like I can physically be somewhere, but I am not emotionally or mentally invested in whatever is happening around me. So I've essentially missed very important parts of my own life, because it was too painful to just be present. It was just too much. I don't even think I had the tool I don't even think I was conscious of it. I just kind of woke up one day last year and was like, oh, I need to become more present in my life. And again, getting really swept up in the San Diego comedy scene was very helpful, by the way, because there are a lot of people asking for a lot of things, and it's just easier to place an emphasis on other people versus taking a look inward and fixing what's broken inside. And so I'm just gonna read it. Okay. Uh, this is word for word what I read. I'm sorry. I'm just so cringe sometimes. It's embarrassing. And again, imagining that Derek and his family and friends are 5 feet from me, and so are Faith's. Okay, this is making it about me, and it's not about me. Okay. I'm Vanessa. I'm an addict. My sobriety date's October 8th, 2017. Faith's sobriety date was April 18th, 2017. She had celebrated 5 years of sobriety just weeks before she died. Nothing I can say or do will change why we are here. Faith relapsed and was sold fentanyl, which caused her to overdose and die. I will never get back the years I spent completely dissociated from that simple fact, from my own life, and from my own body, because it has been too painful to be present in this reality where someone like Faith, so filled with hope and determination to stay sober, still dies from this disease of addiction because drugs like fentanyl exist. I'm still so detached from what has happened that I can't even begin to dip my toe into the pool of despair and grief because I'm afraid it's much deeper than I know and I'm afraid to drown. What I do know is that Faith was a blessing. I take sponsorship very seriously and thoroughly vet any woman I work with to ensure they are committed to the process. It is a painful and humbling one. It requires complete surrender to adopting a new set of beliefs and a new orientation in life based on helping others and understanding that we don't run the show. It is simple but not easy, and it is an intimate and arduous process. And it requires a trust and belief that things will be better at the end of it. Also, my sobriety relies upon helping others, so I want to make sure the women I help understand that and show up. Faith understood that, and Faith showed up. Faith was thoughtful, loving, kind. She had an amazing laugh, and that she used frequently, and an adorable, sad, and rebellious face when she was told a truth she didn't want to hear but accepted anyway. We didn't choose to have these weird brains and obsessive thoughts and bad feelings. We didn't choose to become addicts and alcoholics, but we can choose to recover, to learn to do things differently, to be willing to try, to sit in the discomfort of our choices and accept responsibility for what we can so we can change the outcome to stop it from happening again. Derek, you and me, we are addicts. Faith was an addict. Faith did the right things and didn't make it. I have 3 DUIs. I've been to jail. I still drove drunk. We've done some wrong things, and we are still here. Derek, we're all so much more than our past. We are so much more than the worst thing we've ever done. I want to remind you that regardless how this courtroom feels, regardless how long you are incarcerated for, regardless how your insides feel, regardless what your brain is telling you or not telling you, you are loved. You are worthy of that love. Your life was created with purpose, on purpose. But I admit that I don't think this is it. The truth is that you were created for so much more than this. I hope you get to find out what the truth of your life is and that you live long enough to share that truth in a way that makes sense of your past and in a way that redeems the senseless loss of Faith's life. You don't have to wait to get out of jail to begin making different choices. Day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute, you can choose to be willing to do things differently. You can choose to feel about things differently, to think about things differently. You can choose to be less afraid of this reality where we accept responsibility for our actions and transcend the experience to make the alternate future so much better for ourselves and for others than this tragic and devastating moment. I trust that the court will have the appropriate sentencing to give you the time to do that. And so I read that and I stayed present for it, which I was very thrilled about. And not much else. It was, um, I still don't really know how I feel about that. Because it's a sensitive thing to say that I didn't really feel that he deserved the maximum penalty. I don't know what he deserved. I don't know what deserving of punishment is because I'm not to be a judge of that. That's why I'm not a judge. But it is important to know that like Faith's mom was really pushing for that. And so I didn't want to be insensitive to that, but it was really important that not only Derek, but anybody who's an addict and an alcoholic understands that this is just a moment in time. Is it, is it 5 years? Is it 20 years? It's all the same. It's just time. What are you going to do with it? You don't have to wait for that to be over in order to start making changes. And I hope that I had gotten that across to him. We did make eye contact. I did get to see him face to face, and that was meaningful to me because I did want him to see that I wasn't sitting there condemning him for whatever. I know that he's just had that language thrown at him his entire life. No fact, no, there's no doubt in my mind that he has heard that over and over and again, that why did you do this? Why did you do that? And that hasn't helped, right? That didn't has not changed his life so far. Um, and also at the end of the day, I work for an organization that works with people on death row, for God's sakes, and there are other ways for people to get rehabilitated than condemning them to death, for example. And this is not a death penalty case. So completely different, but not really. Like the thing is still the same. When we lose the sacredness of other people's lives, we lose our own sacredness. And it's such a slippery slope because that's how genocide starts to happen, right? We're seeing it now. And if you're having trouble connecting the dots between this one fentanyl death and this one drug dealer and this one sponsee and the overall picture of how this can ripple out into the world, I don't know how else to explain it besides that, like, we cannot continue to devalue other people's lives on a grand scale or this is still a pretty big scale actually to me, but or in any smaller way. Um, so yeah, anyway, when I was done with it, nobody really talked to me except for Faith's mom, which is grateful for. And one of her friends who I'd met previously, um, who had had a son who'd also died from fentanyl. And she came up to me and had asked me, she said the kindest thing. And really briefly, Rigel went up after I mean, expressed his relationship with Faith and how much she had meant to him. And he told Derek, because Rigel's also in recovery, that he forgave him and he hopes that he gets help. And then Faith's dad went up and he's also in recovery. And he was so close to relapsing after he lost his daughter. That was the worst thing that you can possibly go through, basically, is losing your daughter to addiction. And he maintained his recovery, he maintained his strength in that. And so that was very powerful to hear. And then Faith's mom, I mean, every single tear that you can cry for a mother who's lost her daughter, her only daughter, who she struggled to even conceive, and who she didn't, I mean, she named her Faith because she never lost faith that she could have a daughter. And there she had her, and now she's gone. And so, just every feeling, every emotion that you can have for a mother who loses her daughter, it was there. And even all the funny parts, all the joyous parts, all the redeeming parts, all the painful parts. Um, and of course, all the devastating and depressing parts too. That was all there. And more pointedly, all the angry parts. Faith's mother's very angry, and I don't fault her for that at all. I understand that. I understand it. So Derek got sentenced to just I believe it was 97 months in prison, plus 5 years of supervised probation, plus a lot of other restrictions around where he can live and how and where, etc. Programs that he needs to get into, etc. So was justice served? I don't know. But the kindest thing was that the most reassuring thing that I've heard, besides from Faith's mom telling me that this wasn't my fault, is from this woman. And thank you, Michelle. I don't think she'll ever watch this, but I want to say thank you to her. Because she asked me if I knew Derek, and I was like, nope, don't. That was the first time I laid eyes on him. And she was like, oh, she's like, did you know of him? And I said, just very briefly from Faith's inventory. And we had made that boundary that if he was still using, she was not to reach out to him. And she's like, oh, and she's like, I think that oh, you really gave Faith a voice today, because from what I know about Faith, she would have really agreed with what you said. And that to me was most meaningful. because that is that is who Faith was. She was not a condemning person. She was a very forgiving person. She was a very understanding and compassionate person. And, with all the loss and, the three deaths that I had, that does not include everybody else from the recovery community and from my own family who have passed away from other causes unrelated to addiction. Um, is that the best thing that we can do to honor people who have passed on is to carry some part of them into our daily life. And that is something that she and I had in common from the get-go. We could always see all sides of something. Um, and again, I'm no saint. I am no angel. I for sure have at least two people who, if you name them, if you bring them up around me, I'm like, ugh, no. Um, but even I know that they're worthy of love and they have value, and they are like, I'm not somebody to say that somebody is not worthy of joy and happiness. Like, I do wish them the best. I just don't want them in my life. Um, and so and that's just because of a boundary that I've only recently learned how to put in place, because otherwise I would have been over and over like, yes, please continue to abuse me. That's fine. Um, and so she and I had very similar ways of seeing the world and seeing the value in people, and how much people deserve and need love, need to be loved. And I do think that that comes from this sense of, wishing that we had had more of it during certain times in our lives. And this is the last thing I'm going to read to you, I promise. I wanted to read to you this poem that Faith wrote when she was a kid, that Faith's mom shared with us. It's called "I Want to Be Famous." Water is famous to plants, for without it, they would die. The flowers are famous to the bees. The pain of a scratch is infamous to the child who is desperately trying to hold back tears. I want to be famous in the way that the sun is famous, not because of its beauty and size, but because it gives off light and warmth to those who need it. And she totally did. So thanks for, if you're in my personal life and you know everything that I've been going through, or I've tried to know, but I didn't let you. Thank you, and I love you, and I'm sorry. um, this healing stuff is not easy, and it is. I'm just trying my best with the tools that I have, and I'll continue to learn new tools. But I did want to share this because I know a lot of people are dying from this disease or have died. A lot of us have lost people. And I think a lot of people lose sight of just how deadly it can be. Um, and sometimes we don't even have to physically die in order to stop living our lives. And so if you are struggling, if you're just even reevaluating your relationship with drugs and alcohol, I strongly encourage you to do that. And I think that it's a really brave thing and a courageous thing to do. There isn't any shame in it. Even if you're not the addict or alcoholic, but you're just still, and you don't ever want to call yourself that, then don't. But start making some changes. What does your life revolve around? What is your foundation? What is the basis of your life? Because I can assure you there's a lot more good in this world that you were created to do than to wake up hungover every day, and regretting the text you sent the night before. All right. I love you guys. Yeah. Hope you're out there staying sober or staying happy, staying free. And I hope all your favorite bands stay together.